Part 1. Morning at Manchester Airport. The morning of the 22nd of August 1985, at Manchester Airport, began with an atmosphere so familiar that it felt like a song repeated every day to all the technical staff. The sound of engines taxiing steadily on the taxiway, each Boeing and Airbus moving slowly in the light early morning sunlight. Announcements blared softly, reminding passengers to go to the boarding gate, while luggage carts passed each other in an industrial dance, a harmonious combination of man and machine. Perfect visibility, a gentle breeze from the west, a beautiful flying day so perfect that no one could imagine that in a few minutes the runway ahead would turn into a sea of black fire where 55 people would never step off the plane again. At the departure gate, passengers of British Air Tours Flight 28M filed onto the Boeing 737 to 236. Many were families on holiday. The chatter of children echoed across the jetway. There was a boy of about 8 with swimming goggles on his head and a small blue plastic bucket in his hand. A little girl clutched a teddy bear she had just bought at the duty-free shop. Parents had sunglasses on their foreheads and were laughing about the Corfu beach that awaited them. Inside the cabin, the air conditioning was blowing cold, carrying the smell of new carpet and warm coffee from the forward galley. Captain Peter Tarrington and First Officer Brian Love were checking the takeoff list. Fuel was full, cargo doors were locked, pressure was normal, weather radar was clear, a perfect day for the 3-hour trip to Greece. The chief flight attendant walked down the aisle, checking the safety seats. Luggage was stowed under them. A passenger jokingly asked about the weather, and she smiled. Yes, perfect flying weather. None of them knew that, outside, just under the left wing, there was something less than perfect. Inside engine number 1, between the shiny metal and fuel lines installed years ago, a fuel line replaced during a routine maintenance job had been misplaced. Over time, it had rubbed against the engine casing, creating a point of wear and a tiny crack, hair-thin but the thin line between normal and tragic. Every minute that passed, every vibration of the taxiing engine widened the crack, a fraction inaudible, invisible, without any alarm. It just sat there, like a silent fire waiting for the right moment to explode, while the 737, number 28M, was filled with the excitement of summer. The cabin door closed, the seatbelt light came on, and the plane shuddered as the crew asked permission to push back. None of the 131 people knew they were sitting on a fuel bomb being carried to the runway. Part 2. The journey begins. The train begins to move, large gears under the floor grabbing the cog rails, pulling the bright red train up the nearly 30-degree incline. Outside, a bitter wind cuts across the snow-capped slopes of the Alps. But inside the cabin, everything is the complete opposite. Warm, comfortable, and filled with the laughter of people starting their exploration to the top of the mountain. As the train enters a low, narrow concrete tunnel, just enough for 2 cars to pass each other with a distance of a few dozen centimeters, the natural light disappears, replaced by a dim yellow light mounted along the ceiling, reflecting off the relaxed faces. Families huddle together for warmth. Young couples pull on their gloves and woolen hats to wipe the thin layer of frost from the glass. A few travelers raise their cameras to capture the flakes of snow clinging to the windows as the train shakes slightly. The peaceful, warm atmosphere felt like a cocoon, completely isolated from the cold outside, a sweet refuge in the heart of the iceberg. A little boy asked his father, "Daddy, how long will it take to get to the top?" And his father smiled and replied, "Just a few more minutes." A German couple whispered about the cafe at the top, where they planned to drink hot chocolate. Everyone believed they were on a safe, comfortable journey, like thousands of trains before them every day. But deep under the floor of the first car, things were not normal. As the train moved deeper into the tunnel, the small electric fan heating system under the engine compartment began to operate vigorously. At first, it only gave off a gentle warmth, but because the tunnel was so tight, the heat could not escape. The fan ran hotter and hotter until the metal casing on the outside was hot enough to warm the floor. Next to the fan were wires covered in thin plastic, not designed for high temperatures. As the temperature rose, the plastic softened, sagged, and stuck to the red-hot metal parts. Just a small jolt of the train on the inclined rails, the wire was stretched and short-circuited, creating a blue spark that lit up in the darkness below the engine compartment. Just a spark, as small as a pinhead, but in the narrow, closed space, full of engine oil and fine dust, accumulated over many years of operation, it was all that disaster needed. There were no heat sensors, no smoke detectors, no surveillance cameras, no automatic systems to detect the fire. No one in the cabin saw or heard anything. No one knew that in the technical compartment, only a few times larger than a petrol tank, That small fire was clinging to the old oil, growing very slowly, very silently, but enough to decide the fate of all those smiling above. Part 3. The fire starts in the dark. For the first few seconds, everything was eerily quiet. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. The small fire in the engine compartment was only a pinhead-sized blue light, but its heat was enough to lick the polycarbonate plastic of the fan casing. The plastic began to soften, then drip down, dripping like candle wax. Each drop that fell caught fire immediately, creating a very small crackling sound, but in that confined space, it sounded like a ticking clock. White smoke appeared first, the kind of smoke that the naked eye could easily mistake for steam. But in fact, it was a highly toxic mixture of burning plastic containing phenol, acrolein, chlorinated hydrocarbons, and many other highly toxic gases. The hotter the fire, the thicker the white smoke, and because the tunnel was steep, the smoke began to be sucked up in a natural chimney effect. The cabin above, where the passengers were still sitting, began to smell a burning smell. A few people frowned, trying to identify the smell. A man whispered, "It must be hot brakes." A woman held her hand to her nose. A child asked her mother, "Mommy, what's that smell?" But everyone remained seated. No one had any reason to panic because they couldn't see what was happening right below their feet. As the fire spread to the hydraulic hose cluster placed next to the fan, the rubber coating on the hose began to heat up, then crack slightly. Inside was high-pressure hydraulic oil, a liquid that was both flammable and had a tendency to spray when heated. Just at the moment when enough of the plastic dripped down, the flames touched the hose. A short, sharp, chilling screech rang out, the pressure inside forcing the hydraulic oil out in a thin, spray-like stream. Like a punctured oil can, it sprayed straight into the red-hot flames, and in less than a second, the flames rose 30 times higher, turning the small technical compartment into a sealed furnace. The white smoke instantly became dense, rising rapidly, being sucked along the inclined tunnel like a poisonous mist. The moment the burning smell spread clearly into the cabin was a signal that no one understood. The scariest thing was not the fire, but the fact that there was no one in the cabin to detect it. Funicular Kaprun operated entirely remotely. There was no train driver, no technician in the car. The doors were locked automatically when the train was in the tunnel. There was no alarm button for passengers, no radio communication, no system to interrupt the journey. The train, with nearly 160 people on board, was just a sealed container, sliding up the mountain at an unstoppable speed. A train on fire in a 3-kilometer-long tunnel, tilted nearly 30 degrees, with no exits, no ventilation, no emergency stop mechanism from inside the cabin. It was just beginning. 4 smoke occupied the entire car. The toxic white smoke began to seep through the small cracks in the floor of the cabin. At first, just a few thin, light streaks like steam. A passenger looked down, half joking, half seriously saying, "The heating system must have overloaded," but no one answered. A few people began to feel uncomfortable, holding their hands over their noses, trying to see where the smoke was coming from. In the engine room below, the fire had now grown so large that it no longer held a tip shape, but rather a pulsating mass of light, pulsating with each stream of hydraulic oil that was burning like jet fuel. The oil continued to spew out in spurts, each spurting a stream of white-yellow flame. The temperature rose so rapidly that the plastic sheets, cables, and electrical pipes in the engine compartment began to soften, twist, and flow onto the metal floor. The smoke was no longer white, but turned murky gray, then black, thick, and heavy. The inclined tunnel created a perfect chimney effect. The fire sucked in air from below, pushing all the hot smoke back up into the passenger cabin. In a matter of seconds, the once sealed, container-like hold became a literal smoke trap. A passenger coughed loudly, then another. A little boy cried because of the acrid smell in the air. No one knew what was really happening. They just felt the air getting hotter, more stuffy. In the dim yellow light, the smoke strings were thickening, twisting together like black silk ribbons. A man stood up and tried to walk towards the door, but it had been automatically locked when the train entered the tunnel. He tugged on the handle, but the door didn't budge, only able to whisper, his voice trembling, not from fear but from confusion. "The door is locked. Why is it locked?" None of them knew that this locking system was designed to prevent passengers from falling out while the train was running, and that very design in today's circumstances turned the entire train into a sealed box with no way out. Down in the engine compartment, the fire had reached another part, the oil pipe for the main hydraulic pump, a high-pressure, high-viscosity oil. As the pipe cracked, oil shot out in a powerful jet, blowing flames along the length of the cabin, sending a new wave of smoke billowing upward, thick as black foam. A metallic bang rang out, not the sound of gasoline exploding, but the sound of metal being warped by heat, startling many passengers. The mother held her child tightly, and a few others stood up, but the floor was so hot they could feel the heat through their shoes. Black smoke covered the ceiling of the cabin, spreading like a giant black blanket. Those in the back seats could no longer see the front of the car. A stewardess standing at the end of the car tried to shout, "Everyone get down, get down!" But her voice was quickly muffled by coughing. In the growing darkness, the train continued to drag itself up the slope, unslowing, unstopping, uncontrolled. It slid deeper into the mountain, carrying 160 people trapped in the toxic smoke, while the fire at their feet continued to grow by the second. Part 5. The fire crushes up the cabin. The metallic bang was just the beginning. As the heat from the engine compartment rose to a new level, the metal floor beneath the passengers' feet began to heat up rapidly, no longer warm, but blazing hot, as if a stove were being turned on full blast right below. A woman put her foot down to stand up, then immediately recoiled in pain, crying out, "Oh my God, the floor is so hot!" But before she could comprehend what was happening, another loud whoosh sounded beneath their feet. The fire had found its way back into the air. Hydraulic oil, almost as flammable as gasoline, continued to spray out under pressure. With just a spark, it turned into a long, thin, but fierce stream of fire, hitting the underside of the cabin floor. The fire didn't penetrate immediately, but it heated the metal red hot, causing the floor to warp slightly, while the plastic under the cabin floor began to melt like black candle wax. Then, suddenly, a crack appeared on the floor, forming a small gap the size of 2 fingers. But from there, the flames shot straight up like the tip of a blowtorch. A passenger who saw it first shouted, "Fire! Fire on the floor!" Panic broke out. In a few seconds, passengers rushed to their feet, trying to retreat to the back of the cabin, but the space was too narrow. The seats were packed tightly together, making all movements chaotic. Smoke had covered the ceiling, wrapping around the yellow lights, turning them into dim streaks of light like fireflies. A second flame shot up through another crack, this time right next to the passenger seats. The floor began to glow red in many places, a sign that the temperature had exceeded 500 degrees Celsius. The smell of burning plastic was thick. Anyone who took a breath would cough, feeling as if their lungs were on fire. The sound of people banging on the door resounded, "Open up! Let us out!" But the door was locked from the control system at the foot of the mountain. There was no mechanical lock, no pull, no safety handle. The Kaprun Funicular was not designed to be opened from the inside while the train was running. One man kicked at the door with all his might, and it wouldn't budge. Another used a ski boot to hit the curved polycarbonate glass, which shook violently but didn't shatter glass designed to not shatter under heavy impact, perfect for operational safety, but a disaster when it was necessary to break through to escape. The fire in the compartment raged even more fiercely, shooting long streams through the floor cracks, burning the cabin carpet. Black smoke billowed down, leaving those sitting in the middle of the car only a few dozen centimeters in front of them. A little girl screamed, "I can't breathe!" The mother hugged her child, crouching lower, but the floor was so hot she couldn't touch it. In the engine compartment, the heat reached such a level that it ignited the second oil pipe, turning the entire technical compartment into a mass of fire that continuously shot up like a tornado. The cabin was now a veritable combustion chamber. Passengers jostled, panicked, adults climbing over seats, young people banging on the doors with whatever they could get their hands on: water bottles, shoes, cameras. Every scream was muffled by the sound of the fire underfoot, roaring like a giant beast, while the train continued to climb, being pulled deeper into the tunnel, away from the only light behind. Part 6. Darkness. The black smoke had now filled the entire ceiling of the cabin, so thick that the yellow lights overhead disappeared in a thick haze, darkening everything as if someone had covered the carriage with a giant black blanket. The emergency lights, the last source of light, flickered a few times, and then went out as the heat melted the wiring inside the ceiling. In the near-absolute darkness, coughing broke out in a chaotic, frantic pattern. Not small coughs, but violent coughs that caused many to collapse into their seats, their chests constricted by the toxic fumes. The burning polycarbonate fumes produced extremely toxic gases: acrolein that burned the throat, carbon monoxide that replaced oxygen in the blood, chlorinated compounds that corroded the lungs with each inhalation. One passenger pulled a scarf over his nose, but the hot smoke penetrated easily. Another tried to crawl close to the floor to find cooler air, but the floor was too hot, burning the moment his hand touched it. They were caught between two levels of hell, hot from below, poisonous from above, surrounded by unbreakable steel. Suddenly, the train stopped. A violent jolt threw many people down the aisle. Perhaps the traction system below had been damaged, or the cables had broken due to the heat. But instead of saving them, this stop only made things worse. When the train stopped, the chimney effect in the tunnel intensified. The hot smoke was no longer pulled by the movement of the car, but stood still, accumulated, and then poured into the cabin at a terrifying speed. In just a few seconds, the car was plunged into complete darkness, no light, no direction. The people in the cabin did not know which way was out, which was ahead or behind. Some people tried to reach the door, but touched a surface as hot as an oven. A passenger screamed in frustration, "We can't get out! The door won't open!" And panicked screams echoed throughout the car. "Open the door, please! Can anyone hear me?" But no one heard. No one could hear. Outside, just a few meters away, was a narrow, smoking tunnel, 3.3 kilometers long, with no exits, no side doors, no fire shelters, no rescue mechanism of any kind. The temperature in the engine compartment had exceeded 800 degrees Celsius, causing the metal under the floor to deform, emitting continuous clang, crack, bang, sounds like hammers hitting the frame of the carriage. The passengers could see nothing, only bumping into each other in the darkness, stumbling over seats, trying to pull each other up. Many began to lose consciousness from CO poisoning, falling silently amid the screams. A man smashed the glass with a metal water bottle until his hands bled, but the glass still did not crack. A woman tapped on the ceiling as if hoping someone would hear. A young man shouted, "There's no air! I can't breathe!" And he was right. The cabin was now almost devoid of oxygen. Just as all life was being suffocated, a huge stream of fire suddenly burst from the engine compartment for the last time, penetrating the cracks in the floor like the last breath of a monster spitting out its own organs. The cabin was completely engulfed in flames. The darkness was bright for a single second, then immediately returned to complete darkness. Part 7. The Impossible Escape. When the cabin was plunged into absolute darkness, with only the crackling of the fire on the floor and the sound of coughing, at the end of the car, near the rear door, a small group was still more conscious than the rest. Not because they were calmer, but because the smoke had not yet thickened enough to make them lose consciousness. They were also the only ones who still had a chance, even if the chance was small to the point of despair. A young passenger, lying close to the aisle, groped along the armrest to the rear door, touching the hot metal handle until his skin blistered. He pulled his hand back, screaming in pain, but turned again, wrapping his jacket around his arm and pulling. The door wouldn't open. The airlock system on the outside of the train was still holding it tight. Another person kicked at the door with his foot, but it wouldn't budge. A woman used a ski pole to hit the curved polycarbonate glass, which vibrated but didn't break because it was designed to not break when the train was running. A man pounded on the ceiling, swearing in despair. "There's no way out! We're trapped!" Just when all hope seemed lost, something strange happened. As the fire in the engine compartment flared up for the last time, the hydraulic pressure system of the first car broke completely, the thermal shock causing the joints and locking pins to expand and contract abnormally. A small click sounded, very slight, but to those desperate for air, it sounded like a knock on the door. The back door released its lock. Not completely open, but a few millimeters, enough for a puff of hot smoke to make those nearby back away, and enough for them to understand that this was their only chance. "Push! Push!" someone shouted through the black smoke. 3 people leaned on each other, using all their strength to push the door. The metal was hot and warped, but after 2 pushes, the door opened a little more, enough for a person to get through. Smoke poured from the cabin like steam from a pressure cooker, the heat making many turn away. The youngest person rushed out first, crawling into the smoky tunnel, where the space, while toxic, at least was no longer trapped in a steel box that was burning itself. A woman followed, then an older man pulled out by 2 others. The tunnel was still 30 degrees steep, and the smoke from the cabin was immediately sucked up to where the train stopped. Looking up was a dim light. Looking down was pitch black. There was no rescue on either side, just smoke, fire, and a 3.3 kilometers long tunnel. They chose the only direction they could breathe, down, where the smoke was not as thick as above. "Run! Bend down and run!" someone shouted, but running on the steep, oil-stained rails was almost impossible. Many slipped and fell, coughing, trying to hold on to the tunnel wall to keep their balance. Some fainted immediately after escaping the cabin because they had inhaled too much smoke. Meanwhile, inside the sealed cabin, there was no chance. Those sitting far from the back door could not reach in time, the toxic black smoke continued to pour down. The heat increased, causing the cabin carpet to smolder. In just a few minutes, all the remaining people fell unconscious. The small group of survivors, just a few of the nearly 160 passengers, continued to grope in the darkness of the tunnel, each breath burning, each step slipping on the inclined floor. They did not know how long they had left to live, did not know if anyone was waiting at the end of the tunnel, did not know if there was still oxygen to breathe. They only knew one thing. They were the only ones no longer trapped in the steel fire chamber behind. Part 8. The tunnel turns into a chimney. Those who had just escaped through the back door had just managed to stand up when a stream of black smoke rose from the cabin above, swirling like a soot dragon. They panicked and retreated down the slope, their instincts telling them that standing near the train car for another second could cost them their lives. The already tight and closed tunnel had now become a giant chimney. The burning train was at a higher point, the heat from the engine compartment causing a strong stream of hot air to rise and drag toxic smoke with it, passing over their heads and being sucked back up to the roof of the tunnel, flowing upwards like a dark stream. One of them turned to take a quick look, and the image haunted him for the rest of his life. From the back door of the cabin, flames were spewing out in waves as if breathing, as if the train itself was trying to spit its innards into the tunnel. The second woman had just crawled out when she collapsed on the concrete floor, coughing so hard that she thought her lungs would burst out. A man pulled her up, whispering hoarsely, "Don't stop. We have to go down. We have to find air." But the way down was not easy. The rails were sharp and slippery, the ground was slanted, and hot smoke from above kept crashing down in waves. Every time they tried to breathe, their throats ached as if they were being scratched. Their eyes stung so much that many had to close their eyes and continue crawling down the slope. In the darkness, the tunnel was reduced to two colors, black from the smoke and pale orange reflecting from the fire above. The only sounds were coughs, broken footsteps, and the roar of the fire like a beast trapped in the heart of a mountain. A young man fell, his head hitting the rail. He groped for the tunnel wall, touched the hot concrete, then struggled to stand. Staggered on running would make him unable to breathe. Stopping would kill him. They did not know that a few hundred meters above, the cabin had become a veritable incinerator. The train car, once painted red, had now turned its entire body black as coal. The fire below burned the hydraulic oil, then the electrical system, then every decoration in the cabin. The train was sealed so that no heat could escape. The cabin was no different from a steel furnace. The chimney effect pushed all the smoke and heat forward, then back, creating a huge swirling air current. The survivors felt it on their skin every time the hot air from above rushed down. Their hair fluttered, their faces burned. A woman shouted in the darkness, "There's someone ahead!" But it was only an echo of herself, carried on the concrete tunnel. They kept going, sometimes crawling on their hands because their legs had lost feeling. They had no idea how far they had gone. In the dense darkness, time distorted, each minute felt like an hour. They just knew they had to go lower, find a place where the smoke wasn't so thick, find a chance to get out. After a while, someone shouted, "I feel the wind! Down there! There's wind!" And sure enough, a gentle wind blew up from deeper in the tunnel. The air was cooler and a little easier to breathe. For them now, it was a sign of life. Holding on to each other, they continued down, step by step, avoiding the slippery rails and hot metal, moving further away from the death that was still curling in the black smoke above, becoming the only group in the entire train that had a chance to see the light of day. Part 9. Survivors meet the lock. The weak, cool breeze blowing up from deep in the tunnel was the survivors' only hope of survival. They clung to the tunnel walls, coughing as they walked, sometimes crawling on their hands to keep their balance on the 30-degree slope of the dirty oil and soot floor. The black smoke still blew down from behind them in waves, as if trying to pull them back to death. After a few minutes of dragging themselves in the darkness, which seemed to last forever, they began to see something else. A faint spot of light in the distance, not the sun, but the emergency lights of the tunnel below. A woman's voice trembled. We're almost out." The group of survivors numbered about 14 people, all exhausted, their clothes covered in soot, their eyes red from the smoke. Seeing the light, they tried to speed up. Some ran unsteadily, others tried to hold their breath so as not to collapse. But when they reached the door, they found it locked. A large metal bar-like barrier against intrusion had been closed from the outside, a standard security measure to prevent people from climbing into the tunnel from the foot of the mountain. The steel mesh door was thick, its hinges were stiff. It could neither be pulled nor broken. A man pounded on the door, shouting hoarsely, "Help us! Is anyone out there?" But there was no answer. A woman tried to put her hand through the mesh to pull the latch, but it was out of reach. A young man used his whole body to pound on the door repeatedly until his shoulder was numb. The door only shook slightly, and then stood still like a silent wall. The smoke from above began to pour down more strongly, drawn by the slope and heat of the burning cabin. The heat lashed their backs like licking fire. One man coughed until he collapsed right in front of the door, still holding onto the bars as if for the last chance. In the midst of the chaos, a young tourist suddenly shouted, There's a small path, a side door." A few meters from the main door was a small, low, narrow hatch like a technical niche. The metal door was locked with an old, seemingly unstable lever. The group rushed forward. A man kicked hard with his foot, bending the lever. A woman used a metal bar picked up along the rail to insert into the crack of the door and pulled with all her might. There was a crack sound. The top hinges flew open. Behind him, someone shouted, "Hurry! The smoke is coming!" The black smoke from the cabin was indeed being pushed down by the wind more quickly. The heat pressure turned the tunnel into a jagged chimney. Each wave of hot air rushing down made the whole space vibrate. The group put all their strength into pushing once more. Bang! The side door opened, just wide enough for each person to pass through. The collapsed person was pulled in first. Then each person crawled through the narrow gap, scratched, suffocated, but still alive. A woman had to remove the backpack stuck on her back to get through. A man pushed his child in first, and then forced his whole body through last. When the last person just stuck his foot out, a stream of hot smoke blew down, swirling into the main door like a beast, screaming at the loss of its prey. The side door slammed shut behind them. They fell onto the cold concrete floor, coughing but breathing real oxygen for the first time in many minutes. They were not safe, but they had escaped death right behind them. In front of them was a narrow technical corridor that led to an unknown destination. But they knew clearly they were the only group of survivors in the entire train. Part 10, the final escape. The side door closed, separating them from the thick black smoke pouring down from the tracks above. But what lay ahead was not a wide exit or a brightly lit door, but a technical corridor so narrow that adults had to stoop to get through. The concrete walls on both sides were covered in thick dust, damp, and smelled of old metal, a place only maintenance workers visited a few times a year. No one knew where this corridor led, but everyone understood one thing: to turn back was to die. A man said, his voice hoarse from the smoke, "Go! Keep going! Don't stop!" They lined up, following the wall as they walked, their legs shaking with exhaustion. The dim maintenance lights mounted along the corridor flickered in and out, creating a constant light-dark pattern as if the tunnel were breathing with them. Each blast of hot air from behind made everyone jump. The metallic bang echoes from above. The cabin was collapsing from the heat, but no one dared to turn around. A child began to cry, but the sound was stuck in a throat that was burning from the smoke. The mother picked him up, whispering, "Hold on a little longer. We're almost out," though she herself had no idea how far it was. The corridor suddenly sloped downward, and they slid down the slope, bumping into each other, trying to hold on to the technical pipes that ran along the walls to keep from falling. The sound of fire echoed from the main tunnel like the roar of a jet engine. The cabin above was now a furnace, pushing smoke into every crack in the tunnel system. An old man collapsed, trying to breathe but failing. Two others helped him up and walked a few more steps, constantly reassuring him. No one left anyone. Keep going. After a few dozen meters, the corridor widened, not wide, but enough for them to stand upright. The lights ahead were brighter, the air less pungent, though still filled with the smell of plastic smoke. Then they heard the sound they had been desperately waiting for: human voices. Distant voices echoed from the end of the corridor. "Over here! Someone's alive!" One of the group collapsed from the lightness they'd been found. They rushed toward the sound, toward the white light filtering through the metal grating at the end of the pipe, where several rescuers had crawled in from below, flashlights shining, their suit-covered masks showing that they had fought their way in. How many people? More than 10, 12? I don't know. Someone is unconscious. The conversation was hurried. The rescuers pulled them out one by one, supporting the exhausted ones, carrying the child, supporting the woman who couldn't breathe. Out of the technical door, they fell onto the cold ground outside. For the first time since the train stopped, they saw the sky. But the sky over Kaprun was no longer blue. A huge column of black smoke rose from the hatch above. A rescuer whispered, his voice choked, "Oh my God, those who are still in there." No one in the group answered. They hugged each other. Many cried silently. They had just stepped out of hell with only 12 of the nearly 160 passengers alive, while above, the cabin burned red like a closed torch. No one there could knock on the door to call for help anymore. Part 11. The Killing Chimney Effect. While the survivors were being pulled out of the technical corridor and down the mountainside, above where the train stopped in the tunnel, the tragedy continued at a terrifying speed no one could have imagined. The first car, where the fire had started, had now turned into a sealed furnace. The Kaprun Funicular, a 3.3-kilometer-long concrete tunnel with a slope of nearly 30 degrees, had created the worst possible conditions, a perfect natural chimney. The rising heat from the car pulled in fresh air from below, causing the fire to grow exponentially, then pushed all the toxic and hot gases upwards, straight into the second car where the remaining passengers sat, unaware of what awaited them. No one in the second car had a chance to see the fire. They only saw a wave of black smoke suddenly approaching. In just 20-30 seconds, the entire car was filled with smoke so thick that it was impossible to see the person sitting opposite. The smoke was not only hot, it was deadly. Polycarbonate plastic burned to acrolein, burning the lungs in just one breath, carbon monoxide displacing oxygen, chlorinated compounds attacking the entire respiratory system. The first coughs rang out, then became louder, then stopped. Many passengers collapsed in their seats, not understanding what was happening because they could not see any fire, thinking it was just a normal brake or engine problem. When they tried to take a deeper breath, that was their last breath. Some people tried to stand up to find an exit, but the doors were locked, the handles were hot, the glass did not break. A mother hugged her cow to the back of the car, but only took a few steps before the smoke blinded her, and both fell side by side, unconscious in just a few seconds. In the first minutes, the fire had not reached the second car, but the smoke had stopped most of the passengers from breathing. Many people were still sitting in their normal positions, with their seat belts on, their heads tilted as if they were sleeping. The fire from the first car continued to spread along the tunnel, burning everything: cables, oil pipes, plastic covers, cushioned seats, handrails. The heat spread up, causing the second car to be heated from the outside like a steel furnace. The plastic in the cabin dripped down. Some victims were trapped in the melted seats without consciousness to feel. The entire area became a tunnel fire in the true sense of firefighting techniques. The fire was continuously fed by the steep airflow, spreading quickly beyond control, drawing victims into the heat center like a magnet. At the bottom of the mountain, the rescue team was helpless. They could not advance more than 200 meters into the tunnel. The heat and smoke heated their breathing masks to the point of deformation. Each step was a step closer to death. A firefighter later said, "We knew they were in there, but no one could come to save them, not even one more step." When the last flames died down, when the heat had subsided enough for men to enter the pit, the rescuers found only black ash, twisted metal, chair frames smeared with melted plastic, and bodies lying exactly where they had sat. No one had time to run, no one had time to stand, no one had time to call for help. The Kaprun chimney had killed them faster than any fire could.